I want to get now a view from Israel, and we've got Nick Robertson, who's in Tel Aviv at one of the cities targeted by Iranian missiles. Nick, I want you to tell me where you are right now and what you're seeing.
Center of Tel Aviv, and what you're looking at here is the impact crater from one of the Iranian ballistic missiles. Not the biggest sort of missile there are. They have missiles, I'm told, that are 2.5 times as explosive as this one. That was the impact site here, the street ripped up. But look at the apartment buildings behind me here. This is the principal part of the damage, and I'm told that a lot of people were saved here, if you will, because there was a staircase on the outside of the building, and that absorbed some of the blast. People were in their shelters, trying to sort of stay out of the way, following the government instructions that when the sirens go off to stay out of the way. But let's pan around, and you get a real sense of how big the damage is. That, I know it's in the shade right now, but that big office complex, the hotel underneath of it, shredded. Dozens after dozens of apartments and stores down here, the glass blown out, the windows now getting boarded up down there. And we're just going to turn around. I'm going to ask Sanjeev to follow me around here. And you can see here the residents of the buildings just down here. They are packing up. They're leaving. They're being told to leave. We were down here earlier in the day, and I was talking to the leader of the opposition here, and he'd come down because he told me his son lives in an apartment at the back here, and he wanted to check on the apartment. His son, he said, fortunately, out of the apartment, out of danger, in shelter. But he said he went to have a look at the bed where his granddaughter, his one-year-old granddaughter, normally sleeps. He said it was literally showered with glass. He said if the family had been in the house, had been there in the rooms when the ballistic missile landed, he said his granddaughter would have been dead. And we spoke about what Israel wants at the moment, and this question that Israel is determined, they say, to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, and Israel's desire at the same time to have the United States join them to make that faster. This was our discussion. How do you fight this? They have a lot more missiles that they can fire. They can keep this up for a long time. It could go on and on and on.
We will do this until we are sure Iran has lost the capability of becoming a nuclear power, because what we see here is evident to the fact that we cannot afford a nuclear Iran, because what they're doing now with ballistic missiles, they will do with an atomic bomb on the people of Israel. They never hid the fact that they are not willing. They want the total destruction of the state of Israel and the death of everybody who lives in it.
But their nuclear facilities are deeply buried, hard to target. You cannot believe that you can destroy them all.
Well, we can try, and we're going to do our best, and it's a big question whether or not the United States should be involved in this, especially in places like the facilities in Fordow and others.
So what do you say to the U.S. right now and President Trump?
Listen, President Trump will make up his own mind about what's good for America, but we are telling this is not only a threat for Israel, this is a word for a threat to the entire globe.
So you want them to come in now, the U.S., others?
I think it will be in everybody's interest, the region, the world, the United States, and of course Israel. But again, we trust President Trump is going to do the right thing, not only for America, but also for America and for the world.
And if they don't come in on your side and support you in the strikes against the Iranian nuclear facilities, what then?
Then we will have to continue until we are sure that Iran doesn't have the capability of becoming a nuclear threat to the people of Israel.
And what that really means is that this could go on not just days, not just a week, but weeks, because obviously Iran's nuclear facilities are very difficult for Israel to access and destroy in the way that they appear to want to do that. And what does that mean in cities like Tel Aviv and around the country here in Israel? It likely means more of this. Israel's targeting those missile launchers, but it says so far it's only managed to take out 1/3 of them. More than 50 or about 50 missiles fired last night, and a lot of damage done. 8 people were killed.
I want to get more on this and what else the president is saying about the conflict from Elena Treen. Elena, good to have you with us. Where's Trump's mindset at this point, you know, blocking the taking out of the Ayatollah, and what this fundamentally means for perhaps diplomatic efforts down the line?
Yeah, so that decision, and this is from multiple conversations both I and my colleagues at the White House have had with Trump administration officials, is that we had learned that Israel had gone to the U.S. and said that there was a window of opportunity, that is the language that they had been using, to try and take out Iran's supreme leader. And essentially what we were told is that the president directed his team to tell the Israelis that he opposed that plan. And at the heart of that decision, we were told, is that the president believes that a regime change of that level, of having any sort of U.S. involvement in trying to do that, or even if the Israelis did that on their own, that would lead to potentially bringing this conflict into a full-out war. And that is what the president and his team wants to avoid. And that's why there's been this question now for the past several days after Israel launched those unprecedented strikes at first on the Iranians, is what will U.S. involvement be moving forward? So far, we have seen the U.S. help with the defensive capabilities and helping Israel strike down some of the missiles and intercept some of the missiles that are coming from Iran. But that is, from my conversations, where this administration wants to leave it. They do not want the U.S. involvement to be any more direct than that, because we have now heard the president continue to argue that he believes a deal is still possible. He said that when he was leaving the White House yesterday to head to Canada for that G7 summit. I want you to take a listen to exactly how he put it.
I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
Now, Eleni, part of the conversation I've heard, just to go further than what the president said there, is that behind closed doors, he still specifically believes that there is a chance as well to have the Iranians stay at the negotiating table to work out with the United States a potential nuclear deal. Now, of course, there are questions of whether or not that is still viable given what is going on in the Middle East right now. But that is what the Trump administration believes could be a potential off-ramp to all of this. And I think you have to keep in mind where the president and some of his allies and people in his party, have taken a stance on this so far, is that he essentially ran for office and he came into his new administration by saying he wanted to be a global peacemaker. And so bringing the U.S. into this in a far more direct way at this point is still something he wants to avoid. And behind the scenes, in my conversations with Trump administration officials, they are very skeptical of getting involved further because they do not want this to be another war, and specifically a war that this administration helped bring the United States into. And so that's why this is such a precarious position at this point. Now, again, I will argue, though, that we continue to hear as well that this could change. That one thing that Israel's been very clear on is that they want to wipe out Iran's nuclear capabilities. And really, in order to do that and really to speed up that process, the U.S. involvement would be very, effective in helping them do that. But at this point, we are continuing to hear that that is not what the president wants to do. I do want to read for you just something he told ABC News yesterday, because I think it kind of speaks to this in a very emblematic way. He said, quote, "We're not involved in it. It's possible we could get involved, but we are not at this moment involved." And that is really where things stand. Of course, as we continue to see this conflict escalate, we continue to hear the Israelis having these conversations privately with the Trump administration. The door is open that more U.S. involvement, could eventually be something that they agree to. But for now, they are really trying to keep this at a defensive aid posture and not move further into this, Eleni.
All right, Elena Trine, thank you so much. Stephen Collinson wrote an interesting analysis for us on this about the many national security considerations, not to mention domestic political considerations, that President Trump has to take into account. Stephen Collinson joins us now from Washington. Stephen, there's just so much on the table. I mean, frankly, if the end game for Israel is to destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, they will need the United States to get directly involved. That's just the reality that we're seeing. President Trump clearly trying to keep this at arm's length. Big question on whether, if, or whether it's when they'll get involved. What is your understanding of the way that President Trump is thinking about this conflict right now? Because he opened the door and saying, well, maybe there's still a deal on the table, and that was on his way to the G7.
Well, Trump always thinks there's a deal on the table. You have to say that he hasn't been that effective in getting any deals in his second term, whether it's on big international issues like ending the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza, or on trade. But at least by talking about a deal and a possibility of resuming diplomacy with the Israelis, as unlikely as that might sound given the current circumstances, he is sort of kicking the ball down the road a bit, putting off a decision. The big question in Washington this morning is whether the president can keep the United States out of this. First of all, if, for example, the Iranians were to decide to start targeting U.S. bases in the Middle East, that would automatically draw the U.S. in, and that might prompt the president to make a big decision to go very hard with force, perhaps to target that nuclear facility at Fordow, as he doesn't want to do right now. But he's very conscious of his domestic constituency, always, Trump. And one of the reasons he was elected for the first time 10 years ago, in fact, today was when he announced his first campaign, was because of this long fatigue among Americans with protracted foreign conflicts. If you listen to what Trump said in Saudi Arabia on his trip in March, he hit out against interventionists and nation builders. That was talking about the sector of the Republican Party, which is smaller than it was, but that does want him to intervene on behalf of the Israelis in this conflict.